we're going to be focusing on Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. And we're not just going to be focusing on them, but we're going to be focusing on how they overlap and the need for Muslims and Jews to work together to fight these problems. In the current political climate, it's become even more important to discuss these issues, given issues of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party and across the political spectrum, and also attacks on Muslims and Jews in recent months. I'm actually very grateful, as somebody who is involved in interfaith dialogue, that ReviveFM has decided to do this show. And I couldn't be happier to have two amazing guests with me today to discuss these issues. Today we have Dr. Reza, Zia-Ebrahimi, and Uri Gordon. I hope you both are well. Hello. Hello.
Hi.
Hi. So Reza, let's start with you. Could you tell us a little bit more about yourself, and also how is your work, and how are your interests related to the issues that we'll be discussing today relating to Islamophobia and anti-Semitism?
Of course. Thank you, Zain, for your invitation. Well, I'm a senior lecturer in history at King's College London, and I've been working on issues of nationalism and race for the better part of the last 12 years of my life. I have written extensively on racial forms of nationalism in Iran, my home country. And for a few years now, I've been working on precisely the relationship between anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. And I have a book in French that is coming out on this exact topic in a couple of months. It's called An Entangled History of Anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. As far as my background is concerned, I was born in Iran. I was partly raised in Iran. I did, however, spend most of my life, particularly as a teenager, in Switzerland. I was educated in the French language, and I have been living in London now for about 15 years. So I have a mixed background. I'm multilingual. I think in English, I read in French, I dream in Persian. I fancy myself that cosmopolitan character who is loathed today by the people on the other side of the line. But I'm pretty proud of it. And that cosmopolitan figure, which I might add, was also the most loathed figure of anti-Semites once upon a time. That being said, the last point about my background is that as a cosmopolitan, I went to two Catholic schools, where some of my best friends were Jews, and I am myself an atheist. So I'm familiar with Shabbat dinners and Catholic masses and atheist post-dinner conversation.
Amazing. Thank you so much for introducing yourself and talking about your amazing experiences and insight. Uri, tell us a little bit about yourself and also some of the work that you've done, particularly around tackling anti-Semitism in some activist spaces.
Sure. So my name is Uri Gordon. I have a PhD in political theory from Oxford University. That was some years ago. Currently, I live in Leicester, and here I participate in the Abrahamic Circle, which is an interfaith group. And I've also been doing workshops on confronting anti-Semitism, particularly for student Palestine solidarity groups and for groups associated with Amnesty International and with the Momentum group within the Labour Party. Previously, I was a lecturer in political theory at several British universities, where I was always sort of a temp. And currently, I'm working as a freelance academic editor and copy editor. I was born in Israel, and I was a West Bank correspondent on Israeli National Radio. I covered the Rabin assassination, the redeployment of the military initially from the Palestinian cities as part of the Oslo Accords. Later, when I came to Britain to study, I was quite involved in environmental direct action and social movements for equality and against the war in Iraq. Then I went back to Israel and Palestine, and I was involved there both with the Negev Coexistence Forum for Civil Equality, which is a forum for solidarity between Jews and Bedouins who live in unrecognized villages. That's a whole separate story within 48 Israel. And I was also part of an initiative known as Anarchists Against the Wall, which were Israelis and internationals who came to villages in the West Bank to participate in solidarity with the popular demonstrations against the segregation barrier, the settlements, and the occupation. So, I've written both about the politics of Israel and Palestine and about the politics of social justice, social movements, and politics without hierarchy, which is something that I think is very important to tie in with our agenda of fighting against racism.
So you both have very extensive experiences, and one of the reasons why I contacted both of you is because of your different backgrounds and different perspectives that you would bring to this conversation. But I want to start with you, Uri, actually. Given that you have done work in tackling anti-Semitism in some activist spaces, in pro-Palestine spaces, and also I'm guessing on the other side of the spectrum, also targeting Islamophobia. Why do you think it's important for us to speak about anti-Semitism and Islamophobia together?
Sure. I mean, I think we need to speak about them together because of the specific need to discuss anti-Semitism within the Muslim community and Islamophobia within the Jewish community. I'm certainly of the opinion that the most significant anti-Semitic threat to Jews right now, not really in Britain, but certainly in the United States, comes from the far right, from white supremacists, fascists, neo-Nazis, the Proud Boys, QAnon supporters, and all of that stinking swamp. And in the same way, I think that the Jewish community, while it is on the other side of the pond, at least, already under very physical threat from right-wing anti-Semitism, is being distracted from facing that and dealing with that by, being fed this narrative that the real anti-Semitism is in the Muslim community, or that it is in the political left or in the international solidarity movements that are seeking a just solution to the inequality in Israel and Palestine. And so I think it's extremely important also for Jews to understand how that narrative is by itself sort of founded on Islamophobia, and how Islamophobia is actually a distraction from confronting the far-right anti-Semitism, which is the real threat today.
So you've certainly given us some valuable perspective. I would agree with you on a lot of those points. And as somebody who grew up in Muslim community and kind of saw and experienced anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and how normalized they were, and then later on engaging in interfaith dialogue with Jewish communities, I have this sense, the same kind of conclusions as you do. But Reza, would you touch a little bit more on these issues, particularly when it comes to anti-Semitic conspiracy theories? Because it is something that you've written about. You've compared Islamophobic and anti-Semitic conspiracy theories in your writing.
Yes, I mean, just to rewind a little bit, I as a historian of race and racialization, I believe that, well, obviously, Islamophobia and anti-Semitism are two forms of racism. I think that's the only analytically useful way to look at it. That being said, I do believe that they are part of a sort of broader history of racial thinking with many, many points of contact. Now, the fact of the matter is that, unfortunately, due to the politics of the respective fields that we are discussing here, anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, and also color-coded forms of racism, these phenomena have never been studied together. Yeah. So one of the things that I'm trying to do at the moment is to show the many points of contact, as Paul Gilroy would say, between the histories of racialized minorities worldwide in colonial and post-colonial contexts, particularly. And I do believe that the correlation between anti-Semitism and Islamophobia is extremely strong. I mean, study after study after study tends to show that against conventional wisdom, people that are openly anti-Semitic are likelier to be Islamophobes, and vice versa. When it comes to conspiracy thinking, you're right. I mean, I came to the conclusion a few years ago, simply because I'm a very avid reader of conspiracy theories, and I'm very interested in the theory of that and the study of conspiracy theories. I have reached the conclusion that conspiracy thinking in anti-Semitism and Islamophobia is really at the heart of the construction of otherness. In other terms, not only are Jews and Muslims otherized and racialized as fundamentally different from us, they are also racialized as plotting underground to destroy Western civilization. So the myth of the Jewish world domination, particularly in the interwar period, and the myth of the Islamization of Europe today present some striking similarities when it comes to their discursive dynamics and so on, and particularly in identifying a population, an internal population, as essentially bent to our destruction. And this is part of the reason why you find a prevalence of this type of conspiracy thinking in circles that are today concerned about white genocide, for instance, or great replacement, and so on. This is one context in which anti-Semitism and Islamophobia are deeply imbricated and prevalent. I give you just one example. I have many examples. They're all in my book. But as you know, in 2018 in Pittsburgh, a chap called Robert Bowers entered a synagogue and shot point blank 11 persons who were present in that synagogue. It is the largest anti-Semitic crime in American history. What is interesting is the ideology that is behind it. So this Robert Bowers character, we know a little bit about him because we have his tweets and his presence on social media that we can study.
Yeah.
And part of the reason why he decided to take the lives of these innocent Jews was his belief that they were complicit in Muslim immigration, that they were complicit in bringing what he calls devilish Muslims into this country in order to upset its demographic balance. Many similar cases. I could go on for quite a bit and give you other examples if required.
Yeah, no, and we had a long conversation about this, and one of the challenges we thought we would have in this show is how do we condense all of these insights and these interesting things into a 1-hour show. Uri, so Reza has mentioned a few things about the US in particular, and you happen to have more experience or understanding of things that are going on in the US. So one of the things that I've noticed before we go on the break, one of the things that I've noticed when it comes to right-wing thinking is that people often forget how much it's influenced also by mainstream right-wing thinking. So far-right thinking can also sometimes be influenced. I mean, some far-right people have said that they've been influenced, for example, by Trump. Do you think? Yeah, because I think sometimes.
No, well, let me maybe I think what's going on is actually a consistent sort of shift of the political spectrum as a whole to the right over the last couple of decades. So this is part of kind of already since the advent of Thatcher and Reagan, then with the war on terror, and continuing today with the rise of populism of the right or far-right populism. So the political middle ground in capitalist democracies has been consistently shifting to the right. And so some people have already started bouncing back towards social democracy. Were very taken up by the neoliberal sort of privatization dream of the 2000s. But I think that's kind of what's happening. So we see today a new generation of political leaders on the so-called populist right who are not openly saying fascist things, but are supported by them. But at the same time, some of them are sort of aping liberalism in the same way that the fascists and Nazis aped socialism socialism and communism, by talking about secularism, by being okay with homosexuality, and therefore, so to speak, against, being Islamophobic in that context. So movements like Pegida, for example, are not fascist, but they belong to this sort of conspiracy-infested, COVID-denying kind of circle of people, which is basically the recruiting ground for the far right. But I think these are people who have kind of good reasons to think that something is wrong with our society, but are just being distracted from the inequalities of ownership and power that are the source of that to Muslims, Jews, various other conspiracies.
I'm very glad that you touched on these things, and because when it comes to general conversations around Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, it's precisely these dynamics that get forgotten. That sometimes these Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, these things come about as distractions away from the real sources of issues. And one thing I want to add when it comes to conspiracy theories is that they are very easy to believe. I mean, when I was younger, they provide a very easy explanation for the world. I mean, when I was younger, it was, it was easier to believe. It was easier to believe conspiracy theories because they're very simple explanations for very complicated phenomena. So we're going to go on a break. Please stay tuned in. We're having a very interesting conversation, and it's going to continue after the break.
Amigos, the signature name when it comes to burgers and shakes. Our succulent burgers are prepared in front of you while you wait. Whether you go for our 6-ounce Mexican or our 10-ounce Texan, or you decide to go for our messy fries or our buffalo wings, one thing you're guaranteed is quality. Dine in with your friends and family at 400 Cranbrook Road, Gants Hill, or order in on Uber Eats, Just Eat or Deliveroo. Amigos, hats off to great burgers.
Nitro Treats, the dessert lab where your treats are formulated before your very eyes. Keep cool with our flavoured shaved ice, or chill out with our exclusive Dragon Breath Nitro ice creams. Experiment with our selection of mojitos, or indulge in our traditional faludas or lassies. Visit Nitro Treats at 210 Ilford Lane, where our nitrologists remain ready to serve. Nitro Treats, it's nitrolicious.
If you're looking for a unique bespoke cake made especially for your big day, then look no further. Here at Sugar Sprinkle Cakery, we designed some of the most imaginative and delicious home-baked cakes for your special occasions. We do fresh cream, buttercream, eggless and vegan cakes. Check us out on Instagram or Facebook at Sugar Sprinkle Cakery, or just call 07932 665 833. That's 07932 665 833.
Looking to get your finances in order? MR Accountants has you covered. We provide a full range of accountancy and taxation services, including annual and management accounts, self-assessment tax returns, VAT, bookkeeping and payroll services. We ensure you're kept up to date with the latest legislation, and our client-focused approach helps us plan your business finances from savings to investments. We are MR Accountants. Visit our website at mraccountants.com or call us on 0203 432 9138.
Thinking about selling or letting your home? With Maxwell Estates, you don't need to look any further. Well established with over 15 years of experience, Maxwell Estates are specialists in residential sales and lettings. We manage over 200 properties in and around Northwest London, keeping our landlords and tenants updated with all the latest laws and legislations. Based in Edgware, our experienced specialist negotiators always ensure we maximise the full potential of your property. Call us now on 0208 952 0808 for a free no obligation quotation, or visit our website www.maxwellestates.co.uk for further information. Maxwell Estates, the name you can trust.
Kebabish Original, one of the biggest names in the restaurant trade. Visit your local KO to experience the thrill of the grill and the most authentic Pakistani cuisine. From our kebabs to our curries and from our mixed platters to our peri-peri, our chefs prepare your food in front of you while you wait. KO is now offering franchise opportunities. To take advantage of our proven and successful business model, contact us on 0208 446 7779 or visit kebabishoriginal.co.uk.
ReviveFM
94.0 on the radio,
on your mobile,
and online.
Hello, welcome back to our show on anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. You tuned in on Revive FM with your host Zain Hussain and with our amazing guests Reza, Zia-Ebrahimi and Uri Gordon. We are having a very interesting conversation on Islamophobia and anti-Semitism and how anti-Semitic and Islamophobic conspiracy theories work together to distract from the causes of social issue, from the real causes of social issues. Now I want to delve in a little bit more into the parallels between Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, and also Islamophobia and anti-Semitism as they exist in Jewish and Muslim communities and how we see each other. So Reza, could you tell us a little bit more about the parallels between Islamophobia and anti-Semitism in your research, and historically speaking, how are they related to each other?
So the way I go about it is that I don't call them parallels, and I don't compare the two simply because I don't believe that forms of racism can be measured quantitatively or qualitatively for that matter. So what I'm interested are historical instances where there is an entanglement between the two. And in fact, I do believe that the two have the same origins. If we go back to the Middle Ages, the figure of the Jew and the figure of the Muslim, broadly speaking, in the apparatus of representation of medieval Europe is essentially the same. And the Crusades, for instance, targeted Muslims as well as Jews. One of the first large massacres of Jews that took place in Northern Europe in the Rhineland took place by the Crusaders on their way to the Holy Land. For a very long time, the two populations are subjected to identical discriminatory legislations in medieval Europe, but also in post-Reconquista Spain. So wherever there is a Christian prince, if you will, and ruling over Jews and Muslims, and that is the case, for instance, in Sicily for a brief period in the 12th century, in the Kingdom of Jerusalem for a while, and then in Christian principalities of the Iberian Peninsula, you have legislations that are promulgated that explicitly target Jews and Muslims. Jews and Muslims must dress in a particular way, wear distinguishing signs. They are not allowed to be seen in public during the Holy Week. They are not allowed to shake hands with Christians, and so on and so forth. And this brings us to the 19th century, where you have the theory of the Semitic race, which essentially conflates Jews and Arabs, and by extension Muslims, as I argue in my work. So in this period, whatever you say about Jews, you can also say about Arabs stroke Muslims, as my colleague Gil Anija would put it. So the history is deeply imbricated, and the discursive similarities are absolutely striking. And I don't think that this was a secret to anyone in the 19th century. And I do believe that our forefathers were far more conscious of that than we are today. However, in the 20th century, this connection between the two becomes obscured because there is a complete reconfiguration of these two forms of racism as a direct result of the Palestinian question. And I don't know to what extent you want me to get into that. I think that's absolutely crucial in understanding why there is anti-Semitism among Muslims and the other way around.
Yeah. So maybe I'll take this up just for a couple of minutes where Reza left off. I think that first of all we have to point out that the alliance between sort of the European Zionist leadership, which sought to establish a Jewish state, and the British Empire, which especially solidified at the end of World War I, this was sort of quite consciously playing to the anti-Semitic sort of ideas of figures like Lord Balfour and others high up in the British establishment who thought that the Jews had this international power, especially in the United States, that would help get them to join World War I on the side of the Allies. So that was a lot of that motivation. And of course, there was the geopolitical interest of the British Empire in creating sort of what they, as well as the kind of European leadership of the Zionist movement, saw at that time as a Western bridgehead into the Middle East, as a sort of benefactor bringing culture, democracy, technology, and all of these things, and seeing the Jews as, in a way, kind of agents of the West in a sense that corresponded to prejudices about Jews. There's aspects of sort of Christian Judeophilia, love of Jews, right? That because these people were also belonged to this English brand of Christianity, which was messianic, and thought that the Jews had a special role in bringing about the second coming. This is, of course, also Trump supporters today, and much of the evangelical support for the state of Israel, for right-wing Zionism specifically. So that's how anti-Semitism was part of sort of the mix that led to the dominance of an exclusionary Jewish state over the native Palestinian population, as well as to the gradation, the sort of ethnic degradation within the Jewish population between Jews from Europe and, as a lower class, Jews from the Middle East, who turned to the right wing in order not to be in order to deal with not being able to consider themselves Arabs as a result of some kind of those same prejudices. So we can see how that's also implanted into the current politics of the Middle East. By the same token, we see an emergence of anti-Semitism in the context of the resistance to the Jewish state, both locally and internationally, and we can address that too.
Yeah, so it's interesting. What both of you have done is set kind of the historical scene and have defined key historical events and factors that have led to a situation where anti-Semitism and Islamophobia both exist, that they do have somewhat common histories, that they do have the same source, but they're treated very differently now. And the links between them, as Reza mentioned and Ori clarified and further, are now much more blurred. So I guess one of the things that I want to investigate in this conversation is also how Islamophobia and anti-Semitism are manifesting themselves today, and how Muslim and Jewish communities have come to adopt the anti-Semitic and Islamophobic ways of thinking. And, you know, we discussed conspiracy theories, and I mean, among a lot of Muslims, and you mentioned, Ori, concerning anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and anti-Semitic ideas, that they're also related to European colonialism. You know, sometimes the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories include this idea that, you know, Jewish people are American, American agents in the Middle East, or, you know, these things that make Jews killable, essentially. And I think, but also I want to touch on another issue, and I want to ask a question. I want to ask an interesting question to either of you, actually. Do you think that the war on terror has also affected Jewish-Muslim relations? Or actually, yes, you can start, Ori.
Well, I mean, I think the answer is an obvious yes. Now, I mean, the war on terror, first of all, has buttressed structural Islamophobia in the West.
Yeah.
In a way that structural anti-Semitism can't really be said to exist anymore. Okay, so the way that Islamophobia is securitized in the West as well as in other countries, you know, is something that that may happen to a Jew of Middle Eastern origin who might be thought of as perhaps Muslim, right? But that, you know, that kind of structural Islamophobia doesn't have a parallel in terms of anti-Semitism in Western countries. There would probably still be structural anti-Semitism in Poland or Hungary if there were enough Jews left, if they had not been murdered already. The second thing is that I think that, you know, inasmuch as Western society has been swept up in the narrative of a clash of civilizations and adopted Islamophobic views, then the Jewish population that is being sort of assimilating itself within these populations is also being swept up by part of that. So I think you will find among Jews in the West, in Britain or wherever else, a similar level of casual Islamophobia as members of the same social classes as themselves, in effect.
Yeah. Interesting. Reza, so I kind of want to bring... Sorry, Reza, go ahead.
So I mean, I wanted to just bounce back on what we said, with which I absolutely agree. I mean, in any discussion of racism, we have to be absolutely clear about the definition of racism. Racism, including Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, is not merely having prejudice against a certain group in society. Racism is also a structure in society whereby specific minorities are held in a situation of subjugation and a subaltern status, if you will. And so I do agree with what Uri said. I think there is something that is lost in the conversation, particularly in relation to the new anti-Semitism and so on, which is that we find ourselves in a situation in both Israel and Western Europe where Islamophobia operates as something that structures society and defines the role of Muslims by essentially not giving them equal rights and so on.
Right.
And the
state, rather than society.
Exactly, through the state, given that the state is the main promoter of Islamophobia, arguably.
And Muslims are also defined as a security threat, right? And that also affects in great measure how structural Islamophobia operates.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, and the war on terror is absolutely central to that. The apparatus of surveillance that exists today, that is essentially focused on Muslims, is gargantuan. My colleague Arun Kundnani wrote a book that compares the American apparatus and the British apparatus. And, we are essentially faced with radicalized states that today violates the civil liberties of large sections of society in a way that is far freer than they would have ever considered back in the blessed days of the 1990s, for instance, prior to 9/11.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to say is that this definition, the structural definition of racism, is absolutely essential, because the new anti-Semitism thesis that has emerged in France and the United States particularly, but that you also hear about in this country since the beginning of the 21st century, would have us believe that there is a new form of anti-Semitism which is as virulent as the anti-Semitism of the Nazis, and it essentially comes from Muslim minorities living in France and the United States, and so on and so forth. So this is something that I'm happy to talk about at length, because I know the topic very well. Not only there is not really any evidence to show that anti-Semitism is prevalent in the way it is presented in this literature among Muslims, more prevalent than right-wing or far right-wing or Catholic Frenchmen, for instance, where there is a great deal of evidence.
Yes.
But it also completely sweeps under the rug the existence of a structure. There is no anti-Semitic structure in France or Northern America or the United Kingdom in which Muslims would have, absolutely not anymore, in which Muslims would have a sort of influence or that would come from the Muslims. So I think these are conceptual difficulties that we have to be highly aware of.
Yeah, of course. But bringing it back to how specifically these dynamics have affected Muslim-Jewish relations, I mean, one thing that I've found, and I'm only talking about my personal experience here, as a Muslim being in Jewish spaces, that sometimes I'm often seen as, before my views about Zionism come out, or before I discuss, what I know about the occupation and my time in having studied in Israel and all of this, that there is kind of an underlying assumption by some people that I'm the good Muslim. And what I've found in interfaith spaces, and hopefully we can discuss this more after the coming break, what I found in interfaith spaces is that rather than dealing with structural racism and structural Islamophobia in particular, is that a lot of institutional interfaith spaces, they serve to continue those dynamics or to even assume them. For example, when it comes to interfaith dialogue, it's been used as a way also as a means of counter-radicalization and counter-extremism, but then unfortunately also the Islamophobic assumptions about Muslims and how they need to integrate and how they need to show and perform their civility are also part of those projects. And I was wondering if either of you had something more to say on that as well.
I think we can talk about that in the next part of the program, like you suggested. And I think it's worth adding that what happens with this is also an attempt to present the entire international solidarity movement as gullible, as sort of taken in by human rights discourse, under which is supposedly hidden, some kind of agenda of actually destroying Jews, right? So the thesis of the new anti-Semitism is very problematic, but I think there are, ways in which it's clever in corresponding to the sort of whitewashed anti-Semitism of the populist right, not the upfront fascist Nazi far right, but of figures like Orban, like the Polish Prime Minister Duda and Trump and similar, which is this kind of combination of both. Okay? I have no doubt that many of the people who are promoting this kind of new anti-Semitism thesis, they probably don't like Jews very much. I mean, there are people who love the Israeli government and hate Jews.
Yeah,
and this toxic alliance, I think, is important to point out, and the way in which those same people, as well as they will also be propagators of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories.
Okay, so we're going to go on a short break now. Don't go anywhere. We're having a really interesting conversation about the overlaps between Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, and after the break, we're going to be talking about how we can better fight these systems of racism and how we can do it together. So, yeah.
Amigos, the signature name when it comes to burgers and shakes. Our succulent burgers are prepared in front of you while you wait. Whether you go for our 6-ounce Mexican or our 10-ounce Texan, or you decide to go for our messy fries or our buffalo wings, one thing you're guaranteed is quality. Dine in with your friends and family at 400 Cranbrook Road, Gants Hill, or order in on Uber Eats, Just Eat or Deliveroo. Amigos, hats off to great burgers.
Nitro Treats, the dessert lab where your treats are formulated before your very eyes. Keep cool with our flavoured shaved ice, or chill out with our exclusive Dragon Breath Nitro ice creams. Experiment with our selection of mojitos, or indulge in our traditional faludas or lassies. Visit Nitro Treats at 210 Ilford Lane, where our nitrologists remain ready to serve. Nitro Treats, it's nitrolicious.
If you're looking for a unique bespoke cake made especially for your big day, then look no further. Here at Sugar Sprinkle Cakery, we design some of the most imaginative and delicious home-baked cakes for your special occasions. We do fresh cream, buttercream, eggless and vegan cakes. Check us out on Instagram or Facebook at Sugar Sprinkle Cakery, or just call 07932 665 833. That's 07932 665 833.
Looking to get your finances in order? MR Accountants has you covered. We provide a full range of accountancy and taxation services, including annual and management accounts, self-assessment tax returns, VAT, bookkeeping and payroll services. We ensure you're kept up to date with the latest legislation, and our client-focused approach helps us plan your business finances from savings to investments. We are MR Accountants. Visit our website at mraccountants.com or call us on 0203 432 9138.
Thinking about selling or letting your home? With Maxwell Estates, you don't need to look any further. Well established with over 15 years of experience, Maxwell Estates are specialists in residential sales and lettings. We manage over 200 properties in and around Northwest London, keeping our landlords and tenants updated with all the latest laws and legislations. Based in Edgware, our experienced specialist negotiators always ensure we maximise the full potential of your property. Call us now on 0208 952 0808 for a free no obligation quotation, or visit our website www.maxwellestates.co.uk for further information. Maxwell Estates, the name you can trust.
Kebabish Original, one of the biggest names in the restaurant trade. Visit your local KO to experience the thrill of the grill and the most authentic Pakistani cuisine. From our kebabs to our curries and from our mixed platters to our peri-peri, our chefs prepare your food in front of you while you wait. KO is now offering franchise opportunities. To take advantage of our proven and successful business model, contact us on 0208 446 7779 or visit kebabishoriginal.co.uk.
ReviveFM 94.0. On the radio,
On your mobile.
and online.
Hello, welcome back to ReviveFM 94.0 with your host Zain Hussain. We have a special show today on anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, and how Muslims and Jews can tackle anti-Semitism and Islamophobia together, their common histories, their overlaps. One of the things that I want to touch on in this last segment is also a little bit on anti-Semitism in Muslim communities. We've spoken so far about Islamophobia in general and Islamophobia in Jewish communities, and also overlaps between Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. Reza, would you like to kick us off?
Yeah, I mean, I think for starters, I would like to highlight that Islam as a faith is not very concerned about Jews. It's not in a comparable way to Christianity, which is very much concerned with the D-side people, the people who killed God and his Messiah. That being said, there are tropes in the Quran and in the traditions, however, that are that could be considered as anti-Semitic or hard on Jews, and they date from the period of confrontation between Prophet Muhammad and the Jews of Mecca. What you could say is that this body of tropes is latent and can be tapped into, and I think that this is one thing that the Islamist parties nowadays do very well. They tap into this reservoir and they can reactivate it. But the history of the anti-Semitism that we are talking about today is a European form of anti-Semitism that has its own tropes that are quite different. The Jew as exploitative, the Jew as anti-national, disloyal, cosmopolitan, the Jew as conspirator, and so on and so forth. And this form of anti-Semitism emerges is retrieved, if you will, reappropriated by some groups in the Middle East only in the first half of the 20th century, and they are mostly Christian Arabs. I should perhaps point that out. And
just one point that I just want to ask for clarification purposes. So a lot of the anti-Semitism that we're seeing in the Muslim world today actually has its roots in Europe or in European nationalism.
Yeah, I think the one that is prevalent today, particularly in discussions of Israel, is the one that has been reappropriated, if you will, by Arab intellectuals in the 20th century, and is European, very much European, and recognizably so. The tropes are European, the texts are European, the protocols of the Elders of Zion and Mein Kampf are European texts.
Yeah.
And post-World War II, Holocaust denial becomes a part of that. But what is important to bear in mind is that the rise of this form of anti-Semitism in the Middle East, in the Arab world, in the 20th century cannot be decontextualized from what is going on in the Middle East. And in that sense, I do believe that the people of the region have been slightly mistreated by literature, and I'm referring to Matthias Künzel and Clippers and so on and so forth. This is a literature. This is a literature that portrays Muslims as essentially anti-Semites, as if anti-Semitism was inscribed in their DNA. And the Mufti of Jerusalem, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, who was an anti-Semite and who was a Nazi sympathizer, occupies a huge place in this literature because he lends himself very well to this discourse of Palestinians as essentially pro-Nazi and anti-Semites.
So one thing that's really important to mention in this context is that much of the uptake of sort of traditional Western anti-Semitic imagery by both the Palestinian and wider Arab national movement was promoted by the Soviet Union as well. So for sure, like we mentioned previously, in the Soviet Union, there was structural anti-Semitism, in that Jews were seen to have a double loyalty to the Soviet Union and to Jews everywhere else. And if you look at much of the Soviet material, especially that was directed to the Arab countries, and this is in Egypt in particular, where there was much more press, but also in other places, you see a lot of that as kind of as a conduit, for much of the anti-Semitism. This Western anti-Semitism actually comes in by way of the Soviet Union to some large extent, and it's only in the sort of 80s and 90s, after the signing of the Oslo peace process, that some parts of the far right, the Western white nationalists, also try to climb up on the Palestine solidarity, a wagon that didn't last very long, of course. But there's still, by the way of Arab nationalism and those anti-Semitic tropes, we find them now making their way back into some of the more problematic fringe anti-Semitism that does exist on some fringes of the anti-imperialist left.
So bringing us back to the UK, because obviously the anti-Semitism that exists in the Muslim world does also affect anti-Semitism that exists in some diaspora Muslim communities in Europe, but also the Islamophobia that also exists in Jewish communities that we've spoken about. And, one thing that I touched on before we went on a break was how interfaith dialogue, when it comes to structural issues of racism, often is a little weak when it comes to dealing with those issues. Ori, from your perspective, and given that you've also engaged in interfaith dialogue and also dealing with anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, how would you say, what would you say we need to take into account going forward?
Sure. I mean, as a format, interfaith dialogue is not really a format that we should have much expectations of in terms of being able to broach any controversial subject, international politics, prejudices, and so on, because it's premised on finding common ground between religions. And, one of the main things I want to get from it is just for my own deeper learning of a few other theologies and so on and so forth. So I'm engaging in interfaith dialogue more with scholars in front of an audience, but for me, the much more significant way to deal with any forms of racism and so on is through a direct community relations. And I think if Jews and Muslims from a certain neighborhood participate together in a campaign against destroying a local playground or some natural spot, that is much more significant than any interfaith activity in that sense. I think what
interfaith activity, it is bringing people together to, whenever I think of interfaith dialogue, I always criticize the very kind of mainstream ways it occurs because of what you've mentioned. And I think that it does need to, especially between Muslims and Jews, in my personal opinion, it does need a big revolution in terms of recognizing structural forms of racism and Islamophobia and anti-Semitism and fighting against them.
I think that would be a positive development, I think it requires people from within those circles to find the ways to kind of gently bring this up. And when I was, for example, brought on this interfaith circle for Talk Money Week, where they expected to tell us about fiscal responsibility in our faith sources, part of this discourse of blaming the poor for their poverty and so on. But instead, I talked about money and anti-Semitism and the link between the two. So I broached that topic, and I think if you do it wisely and with social thinking and with kind of listening and empathy, then anything is possible. As long as we get past the rehearsed responses, past the stock phrases, that characterize discussions, especially of the Middle East. And we're trying to kind of also question our own taken for granted assumptions, then that already is a very good starting point for people to feel safe and to feel they'll be productive to raise all of these issues that we've been talking about.
So Reza, you've done a lot of research on Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, and in terms of knowledge and background in that respect, you have a lot of insights into how they overlap. What their histories are, what the histories of the racialization of Muslims and Jews are, what our common threats are in this regard. But, so in terms of action and going forward, because we'll never finish this conversation in this show, and we'll never be able to set out, okay, this is what we need to do, but we can at least define what types of things we need to bear in mind going forward. So Reza, do you have anything to say in that regard?
I must apologize for striking a very pessimistic note here, and I am a born optimist. However, at the moment, well, first of all, as far as Islamophobia is concerned, I do not see any force in society that aims to address Islamophobia or even recognize it. I mean, as I argue, the denial of Islamophobia is part and parcel of Islamophobia itself. And it's almost universally upheld in France, particularly, but also across the board in the Western world. And as far as anti-Semitism and the relationship between the two is concerned, I think that at the moment what we are seeing, then again, across the Western world, it's a liberation of racism. It's a legitimation of racism, which has become extremely more subtle than it used to be. I mean, nobody today would say that Jews and Muslims must be thrown out. I mean, except from people that are on the fringes. But the way this new racism functions is by denying that it exists and by sabotaging the means of redress. What I would like to say to my fellow Muslims and Jews and the atheists among them is that they should not forget that they are finding themselves in those that have Islamophobic and anti-Semitic feelings, consciously or unconsciously. They are finding themselves in a very strange situation whereby they are adopting the constructions of otherness of the third person, the elephant in the room, who is the Westerner. The Westerner is the initiator, the creator of both anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. And I would like people to reflect a little bit about the irony of us, the potential victims of these two forms of racism, taking it on and aiming at the people on the other side. Though, then again, to strike a slightly pessimistic note, I don't think that this will happen unless the question of Palestine is satisfactorily solved.
Uri, do you have anything to say to that?
Sure, very briefly to close. I mean, I think these two things are sort of have to proceed together. I am, of course, also not very optimistic about any just solution in the East Mediterranean in the coming years. But I would like to say something very important, which is that, like, yes, it is a Western construction, but we have also to say that it is a construction of the capitalist West, the imperialist West, a West that is characterized by extreme inequalities of wealth and power between the owning class and the workers and the rest of us, between the political class and the rest of us who maybe get to choose a Coke or Pepsi political party on election day. So really, all of this anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, is a distraction from the fact that our poverty, our exploitation, our dispossession, our wars, our hate, our ignorance, our exposure to lies, all of these come from living in an extremely unequal society and not from some Jewish conspiracy or Muslim conspiracy or anything like that. And so the fight against racism has to be the fight against domination of all kinds. It's the same as the fight against sexism, the same as the fight against the exploitation of the capitalist system. It's all connected.
Okay. And with that, I want to thank my two amazing guests for an amazing conversation about Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, their overlap, and how we need to fight them together. This has
Zain, we should make this into a weekly discussion.
At least once a month. Maybe you should have your own program, and then maybe I'll have my own program, and each of us can talk as much as we want.
That's a conversation to have with the radio station. But with this, I will bid everyone farewell. This has been your host Zain Hussain on ReviveFM on a special show concerning Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. And we hope to discuss these issues again soon. Thank you for joining.
Thank you very much.
Inshallah. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.